Your drone footage is wavy because of the Jell-O effect, and ultimately it comes down to a few things, but the biggest one is small vibrations that are making its way through to the camera. Now that can come from the propellers, it can come from the gimbal, it can be affected by the wind and the temperature, and in this article we're going to go through all of the things that you should check if your footage is wavy or it's kind of acting like Jell-O. So check it out, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things for you to try. After trying those things, I reckon you'll be able to get away with footage that is perfect. This video is based on an article on droneflyingpro.com, so go check it out. I'll put a link in the description. Essentially there, I've got examples of different types of wavy and Jell-O-like footage, so you can compare to see which one yours is most like. And also I've got a lot more detail on actually solving the effects with examples, so go check it out. It's a valuable resource, and if this video is helpful to you, please remember to give it a thumbs up. So the first thing that you should check is unbalanced propellers. The propellers of your drone are ultimately like the tires on the road for a car, and any small discrepancy, any issue with the propellers can easily make its way from the propeller through the motor, the arm, the body, the frame of the drone, and then through the gimbal. The gimbal's kind of the last resort, the last barrier of defense for wavy footage, but sometimes the vibrations that are caused by the propellers are just far too large. Now go check out my other video where I talk about when you should replace your propellers, and this is really another one of those. So if you've noticed that your footage has become wavy all of a sudden, it could be because that one of your propellers isn't sat in the motor properly, that you have a small chip or a crack that's causing one of the motors to work particularly hard, which is also creating vibrations, because these things spin 5,000 times per second. No, is that right? No, that's ridiculous, per minute. And it's a huge amount of speed. And so even the smallest discrepancy in the balance can cause the drone to wobble ever so slightly. So the first thing to do is check your propellers, that they're sat in the motor properly, and then you'll be more likely to achieve nice, smooth footage. The second thing you need to do is check the gimbal plate. Now, the gimbal plate is what the drone camera is attached to. Now, the DJI Mavic Air doesn't have a plate, but some of the Phantom series drones and other types of drones that have the camera kind of hanging from underneath has a gimbal plate. Now, these have got small rubber grommets that are attaching the gimbal to the drone, and these can work their way loose, and make sure that all of the screws are actually holding the gimbal in place. Like I said, the gimbal is the final defense against any wavy footage, and if it can't counteract the small vibrations that are coming through, then essentially you're going to end up with wavy footage. So I've never had an issue with the DJI Mavic Air. I think this is a fantastic drone, but if yours is attached underneath on a plate, just check that it's actually secured properly, because the way a gimbal works is that it kind of takes the movement information from the drone and it tries to counteract any movement, but if it's small vibration, the motors literally cannot overcome that, because it cannot deal with small vibrations. It can deal with large movements, but yeah, the gimbal is really something you should look into. Check the screws, check that it's actually fixed properly to the drone, and the gimbal plate could be that source of that tiny vibration that happens as you are trying to pan nice and smoothly, causing your footage to be wavy. Sometimes it's not even wavy footage that's the problem. It's actually something called shadow flutter. Now, as the propellers pass the camera, they sometimes cast a very small amount of shadow onto the lens. And so this is particularly prevalent in drones where the camera is out the front. There's a little lip here, which means that I can just about see a direct line of sight from the tips of the propeller to the camera lens. Now the thing is that if you're flying slightly towards the sun, the propellers can easily cast a shadow onto the lens. And what this does is causes this weird shadowy flutter. So this shadow flutter can be interpreted as like a jelly effect or a wavy effect. So just check that. Make sure that any footage you've got is not sort of pointed towards the sun, or the sun isn't able to cause a shadow to be cast from the propellers onto the lens. And that could be the number one reason why sometimes, your footage isn't looking super great. So check the shadows, and that could be your issue. The weather plays a huge part in actually capturing really stable and nice footage. Clearly, low wind should result in a much smoother flight. Now, some strong winds and gusts of winds can actually hit like a weird vibrational frequency on the drone. Now, this is very dependent on the propeller size, the propeller width, and the rotational frequency of the propeller, but sometimes you get this kind of constant wind that just doesn't sit right. So high wind is definitely something that can cause very small vibrations that can be passed through the gimbal to the camera. So check that out. And another thing is that very cold weather can actually cause the gimbal and the grommets that the gimbal plate is sat on to actually harden up so that it cannot absorb those very small vibrations. Now, this normally happens at very low temperature. I'm in Australia, so it's very rarely do I ever see anything below about 10 degrees. But if you're about 4 degrees temperature, that is when all of the kind of soft plastics start hardening up. So just remember to keep your drone in a nice warm environment before you fly it. And during the course of the flight, if you have to swap out a battery, just bring it inside a car or inside a house if you are in kind of a sub-zero temperature, just so that you give that plastic a chance to warm up. And also all of the electronics, I don't know how temperature really affects those, but just keeping your drone at a reasonable temperature will certainly help it perform at its best. But certainly very cold temperatures can impact the plastics on the gimbal. So warm it up. Now, this is a warning that I've had a couple of times, which is where I've just used a slow memory card. The memory card write speed really can play an impact in the quality of the footage that you're able to collect. Now, if you're recording in 4K, which, to be honest, a lot of us are slowly getting there. The computers are good enough to edit the 4K footage. Now, I remember when I was first editing 4K and my computer just like slowed down. I had to use proxies. But you can actually find wavy footage if the write speed of your SD card isn't as fast as it needs to be. Now, there are a few things to look for. The first of all, you can find a U3. If a memory card has U number 3, then that's fine. And also V30, and this denotes a write speed of 30 megabits per second, which is perfect for anything sort of 4K or more. You really need about 12 megabits per second for a 4K drone, and so just looking for U3 or V30 just means that you're sort of chucking everything you can at the right speed so that you can make sure that you get the perfect footage even at 4K, or now even drones with 5 or more K. So yes. Another way that you can actually try to counteract vibrations throughout the drone is to attach a neutral density filter to the front of the drone camera. Now, the logic behind this is really because if you try to increase the weight at the front of the lens, it could actually dampen the movement so that you don't end up with the Jell-O effect. So a lot of DJI drones have neutral density filters that you can attach to the front, and so by attaching it to the front you can reduce that vibrational frequency to the point where it doesn't look like waviness or the Jell-O effect throughout the footage. So including a little bit of weight on the front has been known to improve the Jell-O effect a little bit, and neutral density filters are good to get used to. I don't use them very often, to be honest, but they are very good to use because they reduce the amount of light going into the sensor, which means then you can increase the exposure and increase the shutter opening time, which just means for better footage and better photos. So the last thing you can do is remove any third-party accessories that is on the drone. Now, this can look like landing gears, it can look like decals, it can look like things that are stuck on, like to drop bait or to carry stuff. And Removing those just means that you're taking the drone back to its kind of factory settings, and if none of the tips in this video work, I think it's time to reach out to the manufacturer of your drone and let them know that you just cannot get clear footage without that waviness or the Jell-O effect. And it could be that they're waiting or working on an update to the firmware to improve the quality of the footage. There has been a few drones that have been released where they do have issues that have to be solved by the manufacturer, either through software or hardware upgrades, and that's just the way sometimes it goes. So if in doubt, if none of these have worked for you, reach out to the manufacturer and they will be able to help you, no doubt. So there we have it. There are all of the things you can do if you find that you have got wavy footage when you look back after taking footage with your drone. Let me know in the comments what you would add to that, and I shall see you in the next video.